Okay, so as most of you will know, I went out at the weekend and I did some observations. I put a video up the other day just showing some confirmation of some of the observations I'd done the previous week. This video is going to be looking at and confirming information that I provided previously regarding Ailsa Craig. First, I just want to do a little bit of history for context. So, back in October last year, I did a series of observations down at Portincross, and I was mainly concentrating on looking at this tanker called the Ramira as it went over the horizon. But as part of that observation, Ailsa Craig was visible, and I did a review video of a series of observations I'd done in different places back in January. This one, reviewing observations of obstruction. Now, as part of that original observation, I did move to high elevation at the time and pointed out that the Ramira became fully visible again from high elevation, even though it was a much greater distance away. And also as part of that, I pointed out that from high elevation all of Ailsa Craig was visible, and made particular note of the lighthouse. So moving forward to May of this year, I performed a series of 3 observations demonstrating obstruction. The first one was for this land-based turbine. The second was returning to look at Ailsa Craig in more detail, showing that more and more of the island became visible the closer I got to it along the coast, and then finishing that off with showing again that raising elevation revealed the entire island. And this last point was demonstrated further by showing that the lighthouse in Ailsa Craig was visible from high elevation, but at low elevation it still couldn't be seen. The third set of observations in May showed that various buildings were hidden behind the horizon. Now, last week I returned to Portincross and was able to get some examples of obstruction again. There were 3 main examples, and one of those was Pillar Rock Lighthouse situated on Holy Island, which was one of the lighthouses I had shown in the Ailsa Craig video previously. Now, this video is effectively a follow-up and confirmation of the Ailsa Craig observations, specifically concentrating on the visibility of the lighthouse from distance. So having arrived at sunset, I've initially set up and taken a handful of photographs of the same stuff I'd been looking at earlier. Some shots of the lighthouse, waiting for it to become active, which obviously it eventually did. And after that, shots of Ailsa Craig to show that there was no lighthouse visible, and the boat that was docked started moving, so more of it became visible. In this sequence, the ferry's coming across from Arran. You can see it's lit up. The lights on the ferry obviously are a lot smaller than the lighthouse itself, easily visible, and as we watch it traverse in front of the lighthouse, we can see the sequence on the Pillar Rock Lighthouse, which is just 2 flashes every 30 seconds. And then moving on to a little bit further in its journey, the ferry passes in front of Ailsa Craig. Still no visibility of the lighthouse in Ailsa Craig. The ferry is higher above the horizon, more of the writing is visible. As the ferry continues on its way, fully out of shot, at no point can you ever see any light from Ailsa Craig. So now we come to the key piece of footage. This is aerial footage from a drone which is at this point 131 feet in the air, as you can see from the telemetry data that I've overlaid. Now as it spins round to the right here, it passes over the coast. You can see Ardrossan Harbour in the background, followed by the ferry out in the water, which is the very small white light just to the left at the moment. You can see the flashing from Pillar Rock Lighthouse, its signature 2-flash signal, and you can actually see just barely the shape of Ailsa Craig in the background, but still no lighthouse visible from Ailsa Craig. I then climbed the drone to 250 feet, and Ailsa Craig's lighthouse is still not visible. So after the manoeuvre and the initial climb up to 250 feet, I then switched the GoPro on to try and record the flight. Now unfortunately the exposure's a bit off and it's hard to read that information directly from the phone, but the GoPro was in a case and was able to pick up my voice by cutting down some of the wind noise. And then finally I begin an ascent to bring the drone up to first 400 feet followed by 500. As I start to make the ascent, the lighthouse from Ailsa Craig is in fact visible, but only once I reach a height of 260 feet. There it goes to 250 feet. Let's get it to climb. Now we hear a lot of excuses from flarefirs. We have angular size, which would apply to this drone footage if it were true. Everything is tiny at a distance here. We also have excuses like swells and waves, but the drone starts at 131 feet and nothing is visible. So we can see from this footage, from over 30 miles away, the angular size is not the issue. Again, it's purely about geometry. It's elevation that allows us to see the light from the lighthouse. It has nothing to do with resolution. It has nothing to do with being at a low angle to the water. It has nothing to do with the size of the waves. It's purely as predicted for a globe Earth. Now, one of the criticisms in the previous Ailsa Craig video from our good friend Anthony Riley was that I didn't trouble myself to do any curve calculations. Now that was intentional because it was all about visual evidence. It had nothing to do with numbers. If I see somebody wade out into the water, I don't need to know how deep the water is or look at an online calculator to be able to see for myself that their legs have disappeared. The same thing applies when we're looking at the geography out in the real world, or items like boats as they go over the horizon. We can physically see it for ourselves. The evidence is there without knowing the numbers. But we do have the numbers here. We know the elevation of the drone at its different stages in flight. So let's see if the curve calculator actually does hold true for this footage. So let's look at all these values involved and see how everything works out. The first value we have for the height of the drone is 131 feet. Now the focal height of the Ailsa Craig Lighthouse is only 59 feet. So with these values at 131 feet we definitely wouldn't expect to see the light from the lighthouse. The next value we have is 250 feet, which gives us either 103 feet hidden or 67.74 feet hidden with refraction. This is obviously very close to the light of the lighthouse, but still leaves it below the horizon and not visible. This also matches with the footage from the drone because we couldn't see the light from the lighthouse yet at 250 feet. So then the next value when I start to climb is around 260 feet when we first see the light from the lighthouse. According to Metabunk, this gives us a hidden of 96.89 feet, or in refracted hidden 62.68 feet, which is closer to the target but it still leaves the lighthouse below the horizon. Now at this point it might be that some people are making the mistake of thinking that this is some kind of victory for Flat Earth by assuming that the calculator doesn't match up to reality. However, we need to go back and remind ourselves that we were positioned up on the rocks and we were above the water level by a good 12 or 15 feet. But when the drone is launched, it sees its initial position as 0 feet. So now we have to look at all those values again and add the extra few feet for our position on the rocks. So let's go back and do this again. We'll stick with the lower value of 12 feet rather than 15 feet and see how this works out. So the first value was 131 feet. Add 12 feet to that is 143 feet. So now for the first value we would have 196 or 146 feet hidden. The next value is 250 feet, but we need to add 12 feet, so 262 feet. That gives us 95.68 feet, or refracted at 61.7 feet. And then, as we know, the light came into view at 260 feet, but we need to add 12 feet to that. 272 feet. That gives us a hidden of 89.78 feet. But look at this. Refracted hidden. 56.99 feet. It matches perfectly. Once more we have the conclusion that the Earth is a globe. The predictions based on refraction, which we can see are evident in the footage, match reality. The distance didn't prevent us from seeing the light once the drone was elevated, which is exactly the way we expect things to work on a sphere. If the light is visible at 32 miles, it should be visible on a flat plane. On a sphere, it will be hidden behind the horizon until we elevate our position, and we've shown this in multiple ways. But the angular size of the object, which made it effectively impossible to see at such a distance through the lens of the drone, didn't prevent us from seeing the light once elevation was increased. And even at the lowest value, we were 130 feet or more above the waves, so we can't have any excuses about swells and waves interfering with our line of sight to the lighthouse. And then finally, by moving to high elevation, we've doubled up on that proof by showing the same results through the P900. So it seems to me we have yet another nail in the flat earth coffin. So it's going to be interesting to see if there's any excuses coming from the flat earthers now. They all seem to find some way to try and rationalise what they're seeing, even though it never makes sense. These people, they try to make excuses for everything. It's all ad hoc and it never comports with reality. Whereas we can go out and make these kind of observations, make the predictions, and everything tallies up. There comes a time when you have to start realising that all the evidence can only ever be on one side when it comes to discussing the shape of the Earth. Any rational or logical person knows exactly where this evidence really points, and it isn't towards a flat Earth. Thanks for watching, and hopefully in future I'll be able to get this drone out and put it to more good use. Cheers.